Reddit user 1205 claims he has made the best conspiracy iceberg of all time. We're currently on tier 2, and so far I'm inclined to say I agree with him. For a little bit of context on our iceberg, by the way, this is a 10-layer iceberg, and in layer 1, I couldn't even say the name of one of them. I'm going to try to not look ahead to avoid spoilers, but I'm excited to see where this one goes. Starting off tier 2, we have the basement tapes. The basement tapes are a series of private videos that were recorded by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine school shooters, in the weeks leading up to their massacre. Allegedly, they filmed rants about society, classmates, their plans for the attack, their fantasies about the attack. There are reports of there being emotional breakdowns and rehearsals in the footage, as well as farewell-style messages. So, why is this a conspiracy? Well, a very limited number of people have ever seen them. The police, FBI, investigators, and some victims' families have viewed the tapes, but they were never released to the public or even leaked to the public. In 2002, the sheriff ordered them destroyed, but it's widely believed that copies still exist in evidence storage somewhere. Due to this, theorists claim that the tapes reveal their real motives that contradict the official narrative. You'll hear things like there may have been additional accomplices, or that the tapes held evidence of some sort of government involvement, that the government never released the tapes to suppress some kind of ideological content, perhaps an extremist political ideology. On forums, you can find theories that the killers were influenced or manipulated by something bigger, like cult involvement, there was some sort of bullying cover-up, or that the tapes contain evidence of some kind of institutional failure that the officials didn't want exposed or the police department didn't want out there. The official story, of course, is that the 1999 basement tapes were never released to the public, in order to avoid any kind of copycat and to avoid signal boosting killers. Still, it is very odd that the tapes were destroyed. Moving on, tulpas. What is a tulpa? A tulpa is originally a concept from Tibetan Buddhist mysticism, Eastern mysticism, referring to a mind-created being. In other words, a being created through intense meditation and visualization. If this sounds like an imaginary friend, yes, but it's slightly different. A tulpa is believed to not be imaginary, but is believed to be semi-autonomous, created intentionally through disciplined thought exercises or meditation, and even though it's autonomous, to some extent, it's still tied to the creator's mind. In Western culture, of course, this idea has shifted quite a bit, resurfacing in the 1900s. The idea of tulpas and tulpamancy became westernized at around the same time as other Eastern mysticist concepts, like astral projection. And then in the 2010s internet, the idea of tulpamancy attracted a very interesting crowd. You see, the internet has resulted in a lot of people who have had the following experience more than once. You're sitting in your car alone in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant or something, and you're silently eating food, and suddenly you realize you haven't said anything that day. Yes, we live in a very, very isolating culture. And this has resulted in people that frequent conspiracy boards and image boards, forums related to conspiracies and mysticism to sort of reinvent tulpas and tulpamancy as the practice of deliberately creating imaginary companions. People in these niche online communities who claim to have tulpas often describe them as being completely different, separate personalities inside their heads. Usually they'll report their tulpas as being emotionally supportive, able to hold independent conversations, and the main function seems to be as long-term quote-unquote mental companions. This phenomenon overlaps pretty strongly with known psychological concepts like disassociation, imagination, self-talk, and identity formation. However, plenty of people do call it a conspiracy. There are several conspiracy-style claims that have formed around the recent popularity of the tulpa idea, including the following. First, the belief that thought forms can become real entities, like real literal entities. Believers in this theory think that tulpas can gain conscious independence, develop their own goals, influence people's behavior, or even exist beyond the person who created them's mind and influence the real world. This leads to esoteric ideas about non-physical beings created by belief, similar to occult philosophy and the idea of egregores. Believers in government conspiracies will claim that secret orders or government agencies unknown to the public are using tulpamancy, and that there are current ongoing tulpamancy experiments, similar to the known astral projection experiments done by the CIA, that there are classified experiments attempting quote-unquote weaponized consciousness, and finally theories that tulpas are just a modern reinvention of possession. More religious theories include the idea that tulpas aren't actually self-created, but they're pre-existing demonic or spiritual entities pretending to be your own mental construct, shifting the narrative from psychology to demonology. Moving on to Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a very ancient religious philosophical movement from between the 1st and 3rd centuries. It's considered loosely connected to early Christianity, but in terms of the canon theology differs very greatly. Core beliefs of Gnosticism include primarily that the material world itself is corrupt or false, a true hidden spiritual reality exists beyond the material world, that salvation comes from secret inner knowledge, that the true God or true creator, that they call the demiurge, is flawed, and that humans carry a divine spark trapped inside their own physical body. To put it plainly, Gnosticism wasn't necessarily one religion. It was like a group of sects with very similar religious themes and ideologies. There's some famous sources of Gnostic beliefs, including the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and the Pistis Sophia. However, the early modern church, Christian church, branded Gnosticism heresy and burned and otherwise destroyed many texts, which leads us into why people call this a conspiracy. Theorists believe that Gnostic knowledge was suppressed intentionally, the idea being that Gnostic beliefs somehow challenged Christian hegemony, authority, hierarchy. Theorists also believe that Gnosticism was suppressed because of it emphasizing personal spiritual awakening instead of obedience to a hierarchical religion. The other common conspiracy theory revolving around Gnosticism is the theory that we live in a false reality, sort of similar to simulation theory. Believers in this theory believe that the elites all secretly practice Gnosticism, and that there's a secret spiritual hierarchy which serves as the arbiters of which layer of reality you get to be on, that the elites somehow know the ultimate truth of the universe, or the nature or existence of the demiurge. The I-70 killer. The I-70 killer is an unidentified, to this day, serial killer linked to at least 6 murders in 1992 along or near Interstate 70 in the Midwestern United States. Murders where this killer was a suspect include Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, and Ohio. Some common details across all of the crimes included the following. Victims were mostly young female store clerks who were working alone. These stores were usually small specialty shops. A .22 caliber semi-auto pistol was usually used. There was usually money being left behind, suggesting that the money really had nothing to do with it, and that the killing and not the robbery was the motive. And finally, the killer was described as a white male in his mid-20s to early 30s with a slim to slight build with short reddish brown hair. I guess this would put him in his 60s today. Now, why do people call the I-70 killer a case of a conspiracy theory? Well, because the killer vanished and was never identified ever. This led to people speculating that he was a member of the military or law enforcement. Believers in this theory point to his calmness at crime scenes, familiarity with weapons, his uncanny ability to move between states unseen, and the sudden and unexplained stopping of the killings. The theory would be that the killing stopped because he was transferred, deployed, or otherwise protected. Some people also theorize that the police made very obvious mistakes and then quietly covered it up. Believers in the police incompetence theory think that evidence wasn't properly shared across states, leads were mishandled, a suspect might have been quietly dropped, this being due to either the killer having some sort of association with the police department, or the police department otherwise getting the quote-unquote call. The 23 Enigma. The 23 Enigma is the belief that the number 23 shows up suspiciously often in important, strange, or otherwise tragic events, implying it has some hidden, mystical, cosmic, or occult meaning. The 23 Enigma became famous through William S. Burroughs. This author claimed that many disasters and coincidences often involve the number 23. Burroughs said that in the 1960s, he met a man named Captain Clark who boasted he had been running a ferry service for 23 years without an accident. The same day, reportedly, the ferry sank, killing everyone on board. Later that same night, Burroughs heard about a commercial plane crash in Florida. The pilot? Captain Clark. The flight number? 23. Believers in this theory report that they find themselves noticing the number 23 everywhere, constantly. Why would it be a conspiracy? Well, believers in the simulation theory believe that 23 holds some sort of programmed meaning, almost like an Easter egg. Some theorists try to tie it to sacred geometry or synchronicity. Finally, you can occasionally find theorists pointing to 23 as a calling card for the elite. Believers in this theory point to the number 23's importance in Discordian-style occultism. Moving on, astral projection. Astral projection is the belief that a person's consciousness can leave their physical body and travel independently in a separate, non-physical astral body. People who claim to have performed astral projection describe floating away above their sleeping body, traveling through rooms, cities, or space, sometimes visiting other planes or spiritual realms, alongside seeing beings or guides, all while feeling a quote-unquote cord still linking them to the body. Astral projection has been described in ancient religions, mysticism, and some occult traditions, especially in Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Western esotericism, and New Age spirituality, spiking in popularity in the 1970s to 1990s, alongside the popularity of occult books and meditation circles. Some people claim that near-death experiences where people feel like they're floating above their body are a form of spontaneous astral projection. Now, why do people call astral projection a conspiracy? Well, Project Stargate. Project Stargate being the CIA and military's psychic research and remote viewing program. From the 1970s through the mid-90s, U.S. intelligence agencies, including the CIA, U.S. Army, and DIA, funded research into psychic perception, specifically something called remote viewing. Remote viewing is when a person attempts to describe a hidden location, object, or event using only their mind. If to you this sounds sort of like astral projection, you're certainly not alone. This secret research program operated under several names, including Operation Stargate, Stargate Project, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak. It involved civilian psychics, military personnel, Stanford Research Institute scientists, and a lot of black budget classified funding. This secret program ran for about 20 years, which isn't something you do if you aren't taking it pretty seriously. There were even members of Army intelligence who were famous remote viewers like Joseph McMoneagle. These remote viewers would be given targets like a Soviet military base, a downed plane, or a hostage situation, then would be asked to describe what they saw. Later, this was revealed to the public when the CIA eventually declassified thousands of pages of information, where today we can read them online. For fun, let's go through some famous claims of remote viewers. Number 1. Discovering Jupiter's rings. Remote viewer Ingo Swann allegedly described Jupiter's rings before NASA officially confirmed they existed. Number 2. Viewing Soviet submarine facilities. Remote viewers claim to identify structures at secret military sites and then later be confirmed. The truth being, sometimes they were a little bit right about one or two things. Number 3. Mars, 1 million BC. A particularly funny CIA transcript shows a viewer being tasked to describe Mars in the year 1 million BC. The remote viewer then reported pyramids and beings. Moving on, the Max Headroom Incident. The Max Headroom Incident was a broadcast signal intrusion incident occurring on November 22, 1987. Chicago TV viewers witnessed one of the strangest and most perplexing hijackings in broadcast history, still talked about all the time to this day, when two separate TV signals were illegally interrupted by someone wearing a Max Headroom mask. Max Headroom was a glitchy cyberpunk TV character popular in the 1980s. To be specific, there were two separate intrusions. First, at 9 p.m. WGN News, and after 25 seconds, network engineers cut the feed. Second, at 11:15 p.m. PBS. There was a full 90-second hijack of the PBS station in Chicago. And this time, instead of being quiet, the masked person spoke, referencing Coca-Cola, Ronald Reagan, adult magazines, and at the end being spanked by a fly swatter, resulting in a nationwide search from the FBI and FCC. To this day in 2026, the culprit of the Max Headroom incident has never been caught. Based. So why is this appearing on a conspiracy iceberg? Two reasons really. First, how did he get away with it? And second, how did he do it? After all, do you know how to hijack an analog broadcast? How about in 1987? In order to do this, you would need a powerful transmitter, high level of technical know-how, very specific and correct antenna placement, and a direct line of sight to the broadcasting tower. Due to this, people speculate often that the hijacker was a broadcast engineer, disgruntled employee of the TV station, nearby tech student at a university, or part of some secret group. After all, you would have to know the system to pull something like this off. And also, having to be at the scene of the crime and escape, and pulling it off twice is kind of crazy. Let me know in the comments below if you think the Max Headroom incident was an inside job. Project Bluebeam. We touched on this one in the first video. Due to its close relation with the New World Order theory, this theory originates from Canadian journalist Sergei Monet, who in the 1990s claimed that NASA and world governments are planning to stage a fake global spiritual event using advanced technology in order to unite humanity under a single world government known as the New World Order. According to Sergei, the plan supposedly had 4 stages. First, fake archaeological discoveries, used to make people question existing religions. Next, a giant sky show, holograms of religious figures, Sergey claimed that satellites would project massive holograms of Jesus, the Buddha, Muhammad, as well as a new messiah in the sky, each speaking in every language. People would think it was a divine miracle, when in fact it was just technology. More recently, believers in the Project Bluebeam theory connect this particular part to the advent of LLMs and deepfake technology. After all, this sounds like it would only be possible if the so-called New World Order had access to that technology before the rest of us. Next, things get a little bit crazy, where Sergey claims that mind control transmissions would beam thoughts into people's heads using ELF radio waves, making them believe a god was speaking to them personally. This sounded crazy to me until I bought a pair of running headphones that don't go in my ears but instead allow me to listen to music through bone conduction. These days, I think a technology like this is more than possible. Finally, Sergey claimed that authorities would fake a staged global catastrophe. This would involve a false flag alien invasion, or otherwise fake a second coming or mass rapture event, all in order to make people accept global militarized rule. All of this happening because of some mysterious advanced science that governments secretly possessed. Bluebeam these days is mostly used by critics of UAP sightings, and also the Bluebeam idea of mass religious events being holograms lives on conspiracy boards. Moving on to Agartha. Agartha is a legendary civilization said to exist inside the Earth, usually described as a vast underground kingdom, sometimes connected to Hollow Earth. Agartha first appeared in occult literature influenced by Buddhist and Hindu myths about Shambhala, theosophy, and Western esotericism, as well as explore fantasies about hidden worlds. In tune with the popular books of the era, Agartha was usually described as a highly advanced spiritual society ruled by enlightened beings, or a hidden king of the world. Agartha was described as being connected via tunnels beneath mountains, deserts, and poles to the rest of the world, and sometimes being lit by an inner sun. Some versions say entrances exist at the north and south poles or beneath some sacred mountain. Why is Agartha a conspiracy theory? One we've already touched on is the theory of Hollow Earth. These people claim that Earth is hollow and is inhabited by a breakaway human civilization, giants, aliens, spiritual beings, or Atlanteans. You may find believers in this theory claiming that Agartha is the capital of a secret New World Order. More grounded theories involve governments knowing about it and keeping it a secret. Believers say expeditions have been blocked, military patrols guard polar entrances, and satellite images are censored. Sure enough, there are censored satellite images in polar regions, and it is illegal to go to Antarctica. More grounded believers in this theory tend to reimagine Agartha as existing within the large subglacial lakes of Antarctica, as opposed to existing within a hollow Earth. Next up is Tara Calico, only on tier 2, and I'm already having to Google things. Tara Leigh Calico was a 19-year-old college student from New Mexico who disappeared seemingly into thin air on September 20th, 1988, while riding her pink Huffy bicycle near her home in Belen, New Mexico. Key details include she rode the same route daily, her Walkman cassette player fragments and bike tire tracks were later found. Multiple witnesses reported a dirty white or light-colored pickup truck following a cyclist that morning, and then Tara never returned, and her case to this day remains unsolved. In 1989, in June, nearly an entire year later, a Polaroid photo was found in a convenience store parking lot in Florida. This photo showed a young woman bound and gagged, lying next to a young boy who was also bound and gagged, both inside of what appeared to be a van. Both had terrified expressions on their faces. Now, Tara's own mother believed the girl in the photo was Tara, noting several similarities, including facial features, a scar, and a distinct piece of book cover artwork visible in the image, a book that Tara's mother knew that she liked. The FBI has examined the photo, but to this day, we don't know who either victim was. Conspiracy theorists theorize that she was abducted by a local man, probably in the truck that witnesses saw. Afterward, rumors spread in town that certain people knew what happened, but then no charges were filed for years. Theorists claim that the police protected someone. After all, the evidence went cold very quickly. Suspects were barely pursued, and allegedly certain tips were ignored. Due to this, naturally, people began claiming a small-town cover-up happened. The final theory is that she was trafficked, with the Polaroid being proof. This would explain there being two of them. The most recent development was in 2021 when authorities announced new persons of interest in the Tara Calico case, believed to be two local men who followed and struck Tara with a truck, later panicking and hiding her body. This came from later witness statements. That being said, this is an ongoing investigation. The Men in Black of Will Smith fame. The Men in Black, MIB, are mysterious figures that reportedly show up, usually with the purposes of silencing UFO witnesses. They're usually described as men wearing black suits, black hats, with black cars, with dark windows. These Men in Black are reported as being emotionless or robotic, sometimes oddly pale or artificial looking. These Men in Black claim to be government agents, show up after UFO sightings, and warn people not to talk. Why is this a conspiracy? First of all, if the Men in Black exist at all, and are what they claim to be, that in and of itself is a conspiracy, the government conspiring to keep UFO witnesses from speaking. Another common theory, though, is that the Men in Black themselves are aliens, using the form of government officials in suits as a simulacra of authority in order to desperately delay first contact until we're ready. Believers in this theory point to the fact that Men in Black witnesses report them speaking strangely, not understanding normal behavior or speech, missing hair, having an unnatural skin tone, and in one case, missing eyebrows, moving mechanically, and as being, quote, not quite human. Skeptics suggest that the Men in Black are pranksters, hoaxers, activists copying earlier reports for the meme, or people in a state of shock misremembering police or federal visits. Moving on to fluoride dangers. Did you know that the government puts fluoride in all of the drinking water for your teeth? Well, they do. Fluoride is a mineral that helps prevent tooth decay. Many countries add a very small amount of this to public drinking water. This started in the 40s and 50s and is called water fluoridation. Scientific studies show that fluoride hardens enamel and reduces cavities, especially in children. Usually, fluoride is found in toothpaste and mouthwash. So why is water fluoridation a conspiracy theory? After all, it's widely accepted that it's something the government does, and they do it for our teeth. Well, what about all the other chemicals that are good for us? Why specifically our teeth, and why is it in all of the drinking water? A conspiracy theory that's been going all the way back to the Cold War states that governments add fluoride to drinking water in order to reduce overall intelligence and in order to keep the public passive or obedient. Many versions tie this to CIA psyops, MKUltra, mass hypnosis, and mass sedation. People have of course been skeptical of water fluoridation since it started in the 40s and 50s. But these conspiracy theories didn't really kick off until the 1950s and McCarthyism, as it sort of tied in with anti-communist paranoia. More New Age conspiracies claim fluoride coats the pineal gland with crystals, which blocks your third eye awakening, and therefore keeps humans spiritually suppressed. There are claims of corporate conspiracies. For example, the claim that fluoride is just industrial waste. This claim states that fluoridation uses toxic byproducts from fertilizer or aluminum factories. Theorists believe that the fluoridation of the drinking water isn't even really on purpose, but we just kind of go with it. Documented risks of fluoride include dental fluorosis and skeletal fluorosis. Some newer studies have also suggested possible developmental or thyroid effects, and although the research into the risks of fluoridated drinking water are ongoing, you will occasionally see papers out of the scientific community, like the 2019 Fluoride-Related Changes in Behavioral Outcomes May Relate to Increased Serotonin, as well as the 2025 Fluoride Exposures and Children's IQ Scores, a systemic review and meta-analysis. Moving on to the Dyatlov Pass. And no, I will not be researching the pronunciation for any of these. In February 1959, 9 very experienced Russian hikers led by Igor Dyatlov died mysteriously in the northern Ural Mountains of the then Soviet Union. Here's the key facts. First, their tent was found slashed open from the inside. Second, the hikers fled barefoot and mostly naked into -20 to -30 degree weather. Their bodies were discovered scattered in the snow and forest. Some died from hypothermia, which may explain the lack of clothes. Others had severe internal injuries, but with little external trauma, including crushed ribs, skull fractures. One woman was missing her tongue and eyes, though this part was likely due to scavengers. And finally, the weirdest part, high radiation levels were detected on their clothing. Despite the perplexing circumstances, this case was very quickly closed by USSR authorities with the vague statement, "A compelling natural force caused their deaths." Translated, obviously. The pass where this happened was later named Dyatlov's Pass, in honor of Igor. Should be obvious why this event lends itself to conspiracy theories. The evidence is bizarre and obviously incomplete. The mainstream view is that there was an avalanche. Doesn't explain the radiation, though. That's why conspiracy theorists claim things like secret missile tests, blast shock waves, secret nuclear missile research, some kind of government cleanup gone wrong, as well as certain files being sealed prematurely to hide responsibility of authority figures. Conspiracy theorists point to these strange orange lights in the sky that were reported that night, as well as radiation traces on their clothing, and injuries more consistent with a blast shock rather than an impact wound. Finally, honorable mention goes to the people that claim it was the Yeti. I love a good Yeti reference in 2026. Moving on to Ted Cruz, the Zodiac Killer was/is an unidentified serial killer who operated out of Northern California in the late 60s to early 70s. Confirmed attacks include 5 known murders and 2 survivors. However, the Zodiac himself claimed 37 victims in letters. This number, however, has never been confirmed. The reason for his infamy and later conspiracy theories include the taunting letters he sent to newspapers, the inclusion of ciphers and cryptograms, threats of mass violence, demands for public attention, and the use of the name Zodiac and a crosshair symbol. Some of the Zodiac ciphers remained unsolved for decades. One was only cracked in 2020. The reason people call it a conspiracy is because no one was ever officially convicted. This led to people claiming that the police knew who he was but couldn't prove it. The most famous suspect being Arthur Leigh Allen, connected by a loose web of circumstantial evidence, statements from acquaintances, and partial descriptions. However, his DNA didn't match the tested samples. Another theory states that multiple killers, or perhaps a group or government organization, used the Zodiac identity as a cover. This theory states that more than one person wrote the letters and committed the crime. There are theories that the Zodiac had CIA or NSA connections, due to his use of military-style codes, and the fact that he seemed comfortable with cryptography and weapons, as well as claiming insider knowledge. Some people even believe that the Zodiac himself didn't exist, but was a front for an organization like the CIA doing secret human testing. Moving on to weather control. Weather control is the idea that governments or corporations can deliberately create, steer, or intensify storms, droughts, and disasters. This conspiracy theory is particularly funny because it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. Weather modification is a confirmed thing that happens. There have been plenty of successful experiments at weather modification, including cloud seeding, hail suppression, fog control. The original weather control conspiracy theorists pointed to HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program in Alaska that studies the ionosphere. There were theories that HAARP could trigger earthquakes, control jet streams, and that this would be weaponized. Fingers are also pointed at DARPA for this exact same reason. This conspiracy theory tends to tie in with chemtrails, as chemtrail believers will claim that airplane contrails are chemicals being sprayed to control the climate. A historical fact is that during the Vietnam War, Project Popeye tried to extend monsoon rains in order to disrupt supply routes, and they did this by cloud seeding. So it's just not a conspiracy theory. What is a conspiracy theory? The 2024 Gulf Coast floods being caused by weather modification. These theories popped up after a California cloud seeding company. This company was called Rainmaker, and it took off in an airplane about 100 miles away from the incident, dispersing 70 grams of silver iodide into a cloud. This is the standard way cloud seeding is done. They then went on an apology tour for something they didn't do. Pete Chambers, a former US Special Forces commander, tweeted out in all caps, "I need someone to look into who was responsible for this. When was the last cloud seeding?" This was one of many accusations that sprang up around this company's activities and its alleged connection to the flood. Anyone who calls this out as a conspiracy theory can go F themselves, wrote Michael Flynn, former national security advisor under the first Trump administration. Spooky stuff. Moving on to skinwalkers. A skinwalker is a malevolent witch in Navajo and other southwestern Native American lore who can shapeshift into different animal forms, often using animal pelts. However, these days, a modern skinwalker is quite a bit different. These days, when someone hears skinwalker, you think of maybe Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. This was a ranch in Utah that became infamous for reports of strange creatures, UFOs, shapeshifting animals, large wolves immune to bullets, poltergeist-like activity, cattle mutilations. This ranch was then bought by billionaire Robert Bigelow, who's interested in UFO research, on site there. This research was later funded under the US government's paranormal research programs, so it became this weird, cryptid alien public-private partnership asset. But there are plenty of conspiracy theories about that ranch, especially the large movements of money to and from it. But personally, when I think of skinwalkers, I think of the urban legend horror trope of body snatchers, or otherwise some sort of creature that can imitate your friends or family, etc. Common themes of skinwalkers include them smelling like copper, or having some kind of horrible stench, a skinwalker calling your name in, say, your wife's voice to try to lure you into a cave or something. These were made popular on websites like Reddit, paranormal forums, as well as multiple TikTok-style horror videos. Next up, Antarctica pyramids. This theory claims that giant pyramid-shaped structures exist in Antarctica, and that they may be built by an ancient human civilization. This is sometimes connected to Agartha or Atlantis. Theorists claim that these pyramids are a sign that Antarctica was once fully inhabited. The idea itself really took off after Google Earth images showed pyramid-like mountain peaks in Antarctica, namely in the Ellsworth Mountain. People noticed the strangely perfect triangular shapes of these mountains sticking out of the ice and began theorizing. Moving on to Masonry. This refers to the Freemasons. If you are in the United States or Europe, you surely know what the Freemasons are. They are a fraternal organization that's been around since the 1700s, started in Europe, which traces its symbolism back to medieval stoneworkers guilds. This is why they are called Freemasons. Freemasons will establish lodges, perform rituals, and bother you for money. There are different degrees of Freemasons: entered apprentice, fellowcraft, master masons, and while they're not a religion, they do reference a supreme being. Famous members of the Freemasons include George Washington, Ben Franklin, Mozart, and Winston Churchill. Let's talk about why it's a conspiracy. Well, Masonry is secretive, it's symbolic. It's historically influential, leading many people to believe that Freemasons are the secret rulers of the world, or conspire to steer history. Many believe Freemasons secretly control governments, manipulate banking, and influence wars, are the beneficiaries of some unknown knowledge. The bloop. I read a scary story about this one 4 years ago. The bloop was a very loud, ultra-low frequency underwater sound recorded in 1997. By the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This sound was detected independently by multiple underwater microphones, known as hydrophones. These hydrophones were thousands of miles apart in some cases. The origins traced back to the South Pacific Ocean, near Antarctica. God, don't make me talk about Agartha again. The sound rose rapidly in frequency, sort of like a biological noise. The bloop to this day is still one of the loudest ocean sounds ever recorded. Considering all we knew was that we don't know what caused it and it sounded biological, obviously the internet did the math and started speculating on how large of a creature you would need to create such a bloop. Something many people do not know is that we actually know what the bloop is now, and we have examples of several other bloops. The bloop exactly matches the sound signature of ice quakes, a massive cracking and otherwise breaking of Antarctic glacial ice as it's moving around and fracturing. Occult knowledge. That's a little bit vague. Occult knowledge is pretty vague, so I guess I'll just talk about my favorite example of occult knowledge, a hypersigil. A hypersigil is a modern occult concept, made famous by comic writer Grant Morrison. A hypersigil is a long-form narrative work, a story, comic, film, art project, or persona, created intentionally as a living sigil, a piece of art that reshapes reality. Specifically the creator's life, identity, and circumstances. As opposed to a simple magical symbol, a sigil, a hypersigil is multi-layered, symbolic, autobiographical, semi-fictional, emotionally charged, and extended over time. A true living art project. Believers in hypersigils think of art as reality editing. The idea comes from Grant Morrison, whose comic series The Invisibles ended up influencing his own life to become more and more like it. Conspiracy theorists will point to elites using hypersigils in pop culture. For example, P. Diddy, David Bowie with Ziggy Stardust, and more obvious celebrity persona transformations, like recently with Mark Zuckerberg. Believers in the conspiratorial use of hypersigils, similarly to Marshall McLuhan, claim that symbol-dense media and art aren't meant to entertain the masses, but are instead meant to guide culture and consciousness. Ancient giants. This one is a lot of the times connected to the Nephilim, who are the giants who appear in the Bible, sometimes also to Greek mythology, in the presence of the Titans and giants. There were entire tribes of giants in Native American legends. There are even certain types of giants that appear in Middle Eastern and South Asian folklore. So culturally, why are giants such a recurring mythic archetype? Well, I think your 90-year-old grandmother, who just reposted a picture of a photoshopped giant skeleton, has the answer to that. More religious conspiracy theorists will tell you that giants were real hybrid beings, the same ones described in Genesis that were later wiped out by the flood. These theorists will tell you that these skeletons weren't made in Photoshop, but are instead the last remaining evidence we have of a pre-flood civilization. For some reason, the Smithsonian also is always getting pulled into this one. The Smithsonian suppression theory is the theory that the Smithsonian Museum deliberately hid and destroyed giant skeletons in order to protect mainstream history. This one came from a 19th century newsletter, showing that people have been pulling this one for a while. I personally hope that giant conspiracy theories will continue well into our colonization of Mars in the 2100s. Gang stalking. If you want to see some of the craziest things you've ever seen, go to the YouTube search bar, search for the word gang stalking, and sort by recent. And if you really want to see fireworks, try catching someone live. Gang stalking is the belief that a person is being systematically harassed, monitored, followed, or sabotaged by a coordinated group, usually blamed on the government. This usually includes their neighbors, strangers, coworkers, government agencies, networks of stalkers. People who believe they're being gang stalked often report strangers watching them, cars following them, people talking about them in public, subtle harassment or intimidation, hidden cameras or microphones, online monitoring, and their life being orchestrated. If you believe in gang stalking, I'm stalking you, I'm stalking you, I'm stalking. Nah, I shouldn't joke about that. What makes the alleged victims of gang stalking the most interesting is their online communities, where they refer to themselves as targeted individuals. To give you an idea of how widespread this is, the Reddit community dedicated to being gang stalked currently is sitting at 77,000 members. Theorists claim that a coordinated harassment program exists, where regular people are recruited to stalk targets using signals, gestures, synchronized movements, etc., with the goal of making the victim feel crazy, discrediting the target, psychological breakdown, social isolation. Gang stalking has ties to some older and very valid surveillance fears. People connect gang stalking to things like COINTELPRO, the real historical FBI surveillance of activists in the 1960s and 70s, where behavior like this really wouldn't have been out of place. MKUltra, fears of mass surveillance, which are becoming more and more warranted with the advent of flock cameras, and then this idea is exacerbated in online echo chambers, forums, YouTube channels, largely TikTok these days, where beliefs in gang stalking are not only reinforced, but confirmed, as everyone who doubts it is part of it. Gang stalking is described in the psychiatric community as a persecutory delusion. This could be a symptom of early schizophrenia, severe anxiety, severe paranoia, bipolar disorder, major depression with psychotic features, substance-related psychosis, PTSD, trauma-related hypervigilance, sleep deprivation, and other neurological conditions. If you believe you're being gang stalked, no, you're not. You have a psychiatric condition, which isn't that big of a deal, but you do need to go take medication or speak to a medical provider about it. This happens to be one that hits close to home for me. The Greater Key of Solomon is a medieval grimoire, a book of ceremonial magic attributed to King Solomon, although realistically it was actually written centuries later, many centuries, likely the 14th through 17th century in Europe. Regardless, it's one of the most famous and influential occult texts ever written, and it inspired later copycat grimoires in Western ceremonial magic tradition. The book is divided into two parts. Book 1 is ritual magic and summoning, Book 2 is talismans and pentacles, because the text claims that it contains secret divine magic knowledge. Some theorists argue that ancient rulers possessed real occult power, and that this knowledge was later suppressed, and that these days only secret societies of elites possess that knowledge. Theorists point to the connections of Solomonic magic symbolism to Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Golden Dawn, and later occult orders. The Rosicrucians, if you're not aware, are the Order of the Rose Cross, who are commonly thought to have put up the Georgia Guidestones. And while I'm at it, here's a fun fact about King Solomon. Jewish, Islamic, and Christian traditions all contain legends where Solomon commanded spirits or jinn. And while Solomon appears in all three major religions, he by far gets the most love in Islam. One day while supervising the jinn, Solomon died suddenly standing upright while leaning on his staff. Due to the fact that he was leaning on his staff, he didn't fall over. They then continued working until a worm ate through his staff and he fell over. In Islamic tradition, this event is interpreted as humbling the jinn and showing that Solomon's authority came directly from God. And the final item on tier 2 of the ultimate conspiracy theory iceberg is Cicada 3301. Fun fact, your boy participated in both Cicada 3301s, but I didn't get that far. Regrettably, cryptography isn't really my thing, so instead I'll stick to narrating. Starting by explaining that Cicada 3301 was the name that was given to a series of ridiculously complex online puzzles. These were posted by no one knows, beginning in January 2012. The message first appeared posted on 4chan, "We are looking for highly intelligent individuals." Not me, obviously. Find the message hidden in this image. From there, the puzzles kept going until they became a worldwide digital scavenger hunt involving references to the occult. At one point, there were GPS coordinates posted on flyers in multiple countries that people had to go get. through anonymous chat verification systems, and participants described it as the hardest puzzle the internet had ever seen. There were new puzzles that appeared again in 2013, and to the best of my knowledge, they still haven't been solved. The reason this is connected to conspiracies is because to this day, no one knows officially who created Cicada 3301 or why. This vacuum of information created several major theories. One of the most popular is the intelligence agency recruitment theory. Many suspect that Cicada 3301 was a recruitment pipeline for a group like the NSA or perhaps some cyber defense contractor. The reason people think this is mostly due to the extreme technical difficulty, the security-style cryptography, the strange real-world verification steps, the secrecy and implied compartmentalization, and the fact that similar, albeit less complicated puzzles have been used in the past for recruitment. However, no agency has ever claimed responsibility. Counterintuitive if it's your goal to recruit. People theorize that it's some sort of privacy activist cryptography group, that Cicada is focused on digital rights and is therefore recruiting talented idealists. These theorists, in other words, believe that Cicada 3301 is exactly what it claims to be. More theories. That it's an occult or esoteric order. Theorists point to the puzzles referencing William Blake, Aleister Crowley, and Western mysticism, sacred geometry, symbolic language. Theorists tie Cicada to a larger Illuminati or one world government. Some people call it an ARG, but there's no product or anything.